Well, hey, let's go ahead and get started, Jason, if you want to. Appreciate. Looks like we've got a really nice number of folks already here, and we are deeply appreciative of the fact that you've chosen to join us today for what may not be viewed as the most romantic subject in the world, but we are excited, I guess, if you can, to bring Jason from Kite Tech on board here to our webinar today and really share a lot of knowledge about what it's like to be living in a world between employees and businesses and the utilization of work equipment and our own personally owned devices. And so whether you're an employee or whether you're the business owner or leading a business today, we think you'll find some value today to that. And really looking forward to moving into this conversation. Let's go ahead and dive in. Again, today I got myself here, and Jason will kind of advance these quickly here to give you a little bit of bio. But my name's Chris Cline. I'm the Executive Director of the Agents Council for Technology. We are one of the programs of the National Big I, really focused on bringing carriers, technology providers, and our member agencies together in a collaborative and neutral environment where we can talk about the issues related to technology and how they're creating opportunities and potentially challenges for agencies in the industry at large, and hopefully trying to bring insight, education, and resources to help really all of us think differently and more intentionally about how technology can be used and help solve certain problems in our organization. So definitely appreciate Jason and the team at Kite. They've been really involved with ACT for a number of years and are great partners and gurus in their space. So Jason.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Jason Gobbel, Chief Solutions Officer over here at Kite Technology Group. We're an IT services and consultancy firm that specializes in independent insurance agencies. We do everything from traditional comprehensive care and feeding of IT systems, all the way to Microsoft 365 deep technical deployments, but also agency management, consulting, implementation, process improvement, workflows, all that fun stuff. We've been doing it, focused on this industry for about 30-something years now. Growing well, doing it healthy, doing it right, giving back, all that good fun stuff. Yeah, so we do have an agenda. This is an interesting topic because it's you don't get the one side of the coin without the other. So we're going to wax philosophical on some things. We're going to talk about some ethics because that's always fun. There's also some nuts and bolts and technical details. But, we're going to start with the basics and kind of work into the broader strokes. When we say bring your own device, like what does that mean? We're going to talk about why we even care, what's on the device, compliancy and privacy laws, what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do. Then we're going to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of things. You've got a couple design philosophies, mobile device management versus application management. You see those terms used a lot. We're going to unpack that stuff. And then ultimately Simon Sinek might not like it, but we're going to end with why. We're going to talk about why we choose one versus the other and what's right, what's wrong, what's the best solution for our agencies. So diving in, let's just talk about what do we consider a mobile device? What do you think it is, Chris?
Really broad question, right? And I think that's what's powerful about this. I would probably say it's anything, any electronic tool that you can use to do your job for whatever your employer is. So I'm going to go with something that broad.
And you would not be wrong. Everybody defines it a little differently. We used to have mobile devices and portable devices, which were laptops, and then along came iPads, which don't really fit into either box. So the terms kind of became interchangeable, and yet compliance and regulation still do make a bit of a distinction. If you've got a portable device, a device that travels, is easily stolen or lost, you had a different set of requirements. There was once upon a time you didn't have to encrypt your PCs, your workstations. But your laptops, absolutely. So it is still kind of clear as mud, but as you think about the device, just think about what you're encompassing in your scope. The way we look at it here at Kite Tech is an awful lot by operating system. We treat workstations, laptops, and PCs. We kind of treat them the same. Um, People use them kind of for the same function. It's just a question of, are they changing desks or are they on the go? And we think of the mobile devices as iPhones, Androids, iPads, tablets, things of those nature. So we do still very much make a distinction between the two, but we've kind of raised the bar of, we encrypt our workstations, our PCs, just like our laptops. There's no difference there. Same security profiles. We kind of heightened what the PC was supposed to do to meet the goal, just to simplify the conversation. So then we can focus on this other non-Windows ecosystem. Of course, somewhere in there is a Mac OS and a MacBook and something like that. Kind of stick those in your workstation category, and that makes it really easy as you go through the tools and the features and that the tools provide. It becomes pretty clear in terms of the drops of the bucket. Like, clearly that one goes in the left bucket. Clearly that one goes in the right, and that's kind of how we've done it internally, and how we coach agencies through it.
So I guess we kind of work through this. It's a question, I guess, on behalf of maybe some listening, as we think about procedures and protocol and how you want to leverage devices that could fit in either one of these buckets between kind of a portable environment, which includes a desk or station, or mobile. Think through the conversation that Jason will share and the points he's trying to make, and be willing to ask questions. Please do, if you get this, because this sometimes, even for me in this dialogue, understanding when we've gone back and forth between the two is something we want to make sure we don't. Well, we want to minimize any confusion that's there as well, and that's why we kind of somewhat playfully put clear as mud, because the lines can get blurry here based on how things work, and hopefully we can clear that up and not make it worse.
Yeah, I asked an agency just a few weeks back, what their BYOD strategy was, and they said, "Oh, we own all the devices. We don't allow BYOD at all." Like, really? You're providing cell phones for all your key people? Oh, no. They use their own cell phones.
Ah, okay. So yeah, that was
what? So that's BYOD.
But bring your own device. Yeah. So that's a good distinction, right? So you had an agency out there operating what they thought was in good faith and hadn't really even considered the fact that their employees were using their personal phones in a work capacity. So it's a good one.
No management, no visibility, no oversight of what was going on those phones at all. And yet they had email on those phones. They had, they're checking into Teams on these phones. And yeah, it was just interesting that they were so adamant in their response. No, we don't do BYOD. We own our devices. Oh, okay. That was pretty ironclad response there. Great. And yeah, so it does get clear as mud, but when you write it out and put in the scenarios, I think the reality is every single agency out there has an element of BYOD, and everybody's got an element of something that they would consider a mobile device, and then something that's corporate owned. So you can kind of draw the lines in terms of company owns the device, employee owns the device, or usage, or something like that. The only wrong answer is to say something like, no, we don't do BYOD, because you do. Just like you do BYOB.
Well, let's jump ahead then. And so, because I think one of the areas where this gets blurry is what's on the devices and how those things sort of intersect, and why that matters. And this sort of builds again to the risks and the compliance issues that come along for it. But we all kind of know some of this stuff intuitively, Jason, but it's pretty impactful when you see it kind of listed
Yeah,
out here and think about the
and it's
impact.
and it's funny when you take the next step and you go down into thinking about what's on the device, you kind of end up answering the first question of what it means to be a device and in what category you fit into. So it's the whole concept of BYOD is very uniquely circular in that way because the road always leads home. It always leads to some other journey as well. So when we think about devices, let's go back to workstations. We're going to define a workstation as your primary computing device. Might be a laptop, might be a MacBook, might be a full tower with a bunch of neon and LED and flashy blinky stuff. That's your primary computing device. And then we've got these accessories, these on the goes. Got a subset of my full functional computing. So if you keep those kind of two spheres operating and you look through what's on the device, that they become kind of obvious. Emails got your, and this is, as it gets obvious, it also gets a little blurry because anytime you say a word, you have to put company and personal in front of it. So emails, you got company emails, you got personal emails, contacts, you got company emails, personal contacts, stored passwords, and so as you go down the list of things, you start to check boxes in the two categories, and you do find a different profile. I've got an awful lot more personal stuff on this cell phone than I do on this work laptop, regardless of ownership at this point. That does have a factor, but regardless of ownership, they have fundamentally different threat profiles, and you'll see the company has reason to care an awful lot about the corporate data that lives on the workstation. I, as the employee, I care an awful lot about what's on the cell phone from the opposite perspective. There's more of me on my cell phone than there is of Kite Tech, and vice versa is true on. Well, I likely have a personal password or two inadvertently saved into my corporate password manager. It's a fraction of what I have in terms of my text messages, and these are specific things. This is these are my dinner plans. This is scheduling picking up somebody from a surgery. I mean, this is all deeply personal stuff to me that I care about that Kite Tech may not. It's not really in their wheelhouse. So that's one of the more challenging things to answer too as you go through is what does all this mean? Because you're going to land on two types of things: personal data, corporate data, and you're going to have to find out where you're okay with them living, because everything needs monitoring, it needs visibility, it needs accountability, and maybe I don't want the company knowing all my dinner plans or having a right to it, or having a legal obligation to fact check it to some degree, because if it's there, it's got to be monitored, right? So,
And this kind of a half segue to really our next thing is, how do you start to think about considerations here? But, some of the things you've put on here, I mean, I think most people probably have gone on to check their social media or to pay their bills on their work computer, even at organizations that probably that might have a policy that somewhat prohibits that, or at least exposes that, makes that susceptible to any of their monitoring policies. And it's good to be aware of that and to have that really spelled out, I would think, if you're the employer, and then to understand that if you're the employee. So if you're checking your I'm aging myself here, but your Facebook, your Instagram on your corporate device or on your work computer, like what does that mean? And how comfortable are you now? Does everything that's on your social media profile become somewhat discoverable or subject to corporate policy? And then, vice versa, if you're using your mobile device, your own personally owned, and you're paying for it, it's all licensed to you, but yet you start to build relationships with your clients or your coworkers and you're texting that way, this sort of blurry line all the way to crossing the line to using your personal device to text about work. um, when do these lines start to get crossed? And could your employer or could a legal scenario make your own personal device subject to a search if there was work stuff on it? And that's why employers, I think you'll get to this, really need and should be wanting to get very clear about how this works and what are the policies and regulations that they've put in place, and then the tools they subsequently put in place to make sure that things that they're required by law to keep for a certain amount of time are available to them and somewhat in their control. And these become very blurred in a life where we're all working remote and building personal relationships with those that we interact with in a business setting. So it's kind of a lot to that, but I like this conversation you've laid out for us on this visual. A few things to consider, and this might be a spot where if you're listening and you have some questions about what if I do this or I do that, please throw those in the Q&A section, and we'll try to address those.
Yeah, and when you're trying to visualize, the things to consider. I always think of two armies meeting at a table to negotiate a truce, because everybody's got skin in the game, but everybody has different needs and objectives and outcomes, and yet we have to strike a balance. And we call that company culture in a broad stretch of terms. But as the employee, there are things that I want protected from you. You've got no right to them, employer. They're my stuff. But so I come to it caring about my personal privacy first and foremost. I care about flexibility. I like working from home, and if I want to work from the couch, I want the ability to disconnect from this desk and go work on the couch for a couple of hours or whatever. So I prioritize flexibility to that. So when I think about BYOD, I think, well, first and foremost, what am I giving you, and what are you giving me? Because these are concessions. I've got to allow some access to some degree. It's only fair. You've got legal obligations. You've got to protect the company data. I have to accept that. Otherwise, BYOD doesn't work for me, and I have to find another way to function. I don't get my email on my phone because you consider it a perk. Well, in some cases, that's the right answer. I do run into employees from time to time that say, yeah, I know having the Microsoft Authenticator app on my phone doesn't expose any of my personal data to you, but I'm just not comfortable with it. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. Okay, let's talk about that, and let's find a plan, and let's find something that works. From the employer side, I got to prioritize the law. I got to prioritize protecting my client data, because I said I would first and foremost, but because it's my obligation, and I get into a lot of trouble if I don't do it. So I must encroach on your privacy just a tad if this device is going to share our joint goals. If you're going to use it for your personal stuff, but also a little bit of mine, we have to be partners in this. And Chris, I know you talk a lot about company culture and all of these things, but fundamentally, that's what it comes down to is, as a company, what are you trying to empower here? What are you trying to accomplish? That's the big question.
I muted myself. Let's pick a let's use an example here to kind of walk through this. So you're an employee, you're an employer, you might equip you're an agency or really, whatever business. You might you might have a corporately funded device. You give your employees either a laptop or maybe a tablet as a tool to do the job. And it gives them access to everything they need, their emails, whatever management system or core operating system, any CRM, any intranet that might have tools and resources to collaborate. And you give them that. But you also say you can use your own device for remote work or when you're traveling, or even kind of expect you to bring your own device to work. And so the can or should is a talking point. Are you even going to permit somebody to use their device? And so you get to that point where if you're the employee and the employer, I think a couple of questions then become, are you going to permit somebody to use their own device and for what? I've seen or had conversations with employees, really, again, it goes to both, is then, so if you want me to be accessible in a 24/7 or an after hours environment, or, if I'm on the road or whatever that is, then give me the tool to do it. Well, there's expense considerations for the employer in providing now another device and the licensing that goes along with that. So it's become far more common, I think, to say, everybody has a cell phone now. Why don't we just put a couple of apps, your email, your authenticator on your personal device? And it gets into this sticky spot where is there a stipend that could be negotiated or should be negotiated there, right? For using something of mine to do my job. The other part of it then becomes how do we make it very clear to the employee that their own stuff is still theirs and they're safe and protected from that? And, if they're out on LinkedIn looking at job applications, their employer doesn't have a right to know that, vice versa. And that's kind of an extreme example, but, that's a really, really unique spot. And that's why these considerations exist. So I maybe just from your perspective for the people on the call, Jason, what do you see now as maybe a more common setup when you're working with agencies in how this, if there is such a thing, and is the employer offering a stipend? Is that just considered part of working here? And how are they kind of negotiating through that and creating comfort for both, that there is a wall that separates your personal and professional life on either, at least on the personal life, right? I think, and then the last thing I'll say about this is, my assumption is if you're using your corporately provided and funded device for anything other than work, you really have no expectation of privacy in most cases. If I'm doing Facebook on my work computer, I have no expectation that what I'm doing while I'm logged in is private. Is that fair? If I'm doing that on my work computer?
That is very fair. And I would say even if you haven't specifically seen that in an employee manual or something like that, I would just take that as gospel. Because one of two things will happen. Either there is an intentional visibility through, performance monitoring or active employee monitoring, or whatever the case may be. There may be active monitoring going on workstations, but even if there's not, there are technicians like myself who, we have a job to do. So when a workstation is broken or not functioning properly or whatever the case may be, we're in there troubleshooting. We're looking at logs, we're looking at files, we're looking at things. We look at web cache. There aren't separate line items for web cache, personal web cache data, although there's in private browsing versus standard browsing. But from a technician's perspective, it's just the workstation and its parts. So when we open it up and we take a look at all the data, there's a good chance we're going to see whatever there is to see. So if you put it on there, I might see it. And if that's a downloaded copy of your bank statement or something like that, even though there isn't a corporate policy that says those things are being audited, it might be in my way in troubleshooting a thing. So I might happen to come across it. You just don't know. So as the employee, prepare for that, because you're right. You log into Facebook or something like that. If I need to open a browser window and troubleshoot, you may have left it logged in, and I may get an eyeful of your feed while I'm moving on to, the actual work role that I have to perform. The standards I typically see, um, the primary work device is almost always corporate owned. Um, I have strong opinions about that. I think it should always be corporate owned, but I do see some agencies that are happily functioning well, where that's not the case. When they have given a stipend, they say, here's $2,000, buy the device that works best for you and your environment, and if you work here for 2 years, I don't want it back, and I don't want any money for it. And I see stipends in those things, but generally speaking, the primary device is owned by the company, and the conversation and the battleground for rights and privacy tend to exist around the cell phones and whatnot. We used to see stipends being a pretty common thing before unlimited data plans. If you're checking emails and stuff like that, you're gonna have to up your data plan. There's some dollars there. But now generally everybody's got a data plan, something like that. So it tends to be rare now, a stipend specifically for that. The general rule of thumb there is like, yeah, you're likely gonna have a Samsung or a Pixel or an iPhone that you bought for your reasons, and now we've got a pretty confined conversation. We might put some emails on it. We might put Teams on there. That's, to some degree, that's about it. You might phone in a meeting from here or there, but the observational space is pretty small and pretty confined. Is there a monetary amount that comes with taking up a little bit of storage and a little bit of data on a super big capable device that I would have bought for myself anyway? It's not like I went out and I said, no, I need the 512 gigs because I have company work I got to put on there. That it just doesn't happen because the devices are just so powerful. So the stipend's got to go out. But what I tend to see there and developing, and this is really going to segue into our next section where we get to the super exciting stuff about compliance and privacy and things like that. I tend to see the battleground where it's compensation. If I'm going to put my corporate emails on my personal device, what's the expectation that I respond to that 9 p.m. email? Am I going to get paid for it? And what does that look like? Because if there's an expectation to respond, there's an expectation to get some money. And from the other side of that coin, even if as an employer, I'm not setting the expectation, I have the obligation. If you choose to respond, I still have to properly compensate you for your time. And you see this taking, real focus in California, where overtime laws are a little bit different than the rest of the world. A lot of people, once you exceed 40, this is overtime. In California, 8 hours in a day, beyond that is overtime. So, for example, I have a couple of folks that work in California, and they might be on call, and they work a full 8-hour day, and then there's an expectation that beyond that 8 hours, I'm paying them overtime. If something comes into their mailbox and they're actively looking at it and working on it, these are overtime hours that I have to consider from a budget perspective. And do you have mechanisms that even quantify that work? That's the challenge of the day.
Let's make that pivot then, right? Because I think we've talked about the device and the different things that could exist on either ones, some of the considerations, and now we make the move. So there's some compliance, and then there's kind of subset here into some of the things. And of course, see Jason and his firm are very well equipped to talk about compliance law, but given the uniqueness by state or even what your own legal team might say or how they would want you to structure your organization, it's always advised to make sure you're getting counsel and advice on this for your own internal policies and procedures and how you want to apply that consistently with again with your own legal team or retained firm. But as an overarching statement, there's stuff here now with data privacy, and then now you get into this overtime stuff you talked about and the culture we want to create in our organization around the expectation of availability and work based on the role. So I'm going to kind of set that overarching thing and let you talk a bit about what to look for or what to talk about and consider in your firm as it relates to compliance.
Yeah, and this is continuing the theme of clear as mud, right?
What's a crazy thing here, right? I just, we're having this conversation. It's hopefully that we're not confusing people more, but this is something that's happening every single day with almost literally every professional in the business world today. And I fear in a lot of places without understanding of um, the nuanced and the not so nuanced risks and implications of this conversation.
Yeah, and that's a good place to remind all the people listening. If you are confused, it probably means you're getting it right. At the very least, you're thinking along the right lines. If this stuff is clear as day, and as my partner Adam would like to call it, blues clues, like if this stuff is obvious to you, you miss something. Because when you take a look at what all the compliance laws say and you compare it to what all the data privacy laws say, you're going to find some things that are incompatible. You, in some cases, cannot meet one without breaking the other. That's just the reality. When the laws are being crafted by people that don't understand the technology, they don't even understand the challenge. They, I mean, they arguably don't even live in the world that we live in or do what we do. Um, so on compliance, it's interesting because you've got some federal stuff. Um, you've got some regional GDPR, for example, if you're European, um, or if you cater to the needs of European, you've got European clients or employees. But a lot of the compliance varies state by state. So, but there are some hard and fast rules. Employer, number one, it is your data. You have a mandate to protect it. You cannot protect it unless you have visibility. You cannot get visibility without getting real close to privacy. So, that leads you into a conversation about rights versus expectations, because everybody's afraid of Big Brother, as they should be, and everybody wants to advocate for the self. And while it's wonderful to trust your employer and know that you've got a very strong employee-employer relationship, you've probably got enough work experience to know that that's not 100%. Every now and then, there's something that doesn't go your way, and it leaves you with a validated fear. And it might not be a fear that applies to the time and place of your current employment, and yet it's still there. So as an employer, I've got to come to the table understanding that. So when an employee says, "Yeah, I just don't want to put that authenticator on my phone because I'm afraid of the stuff, what could happen." It's knowing the rights, knowing the expectations, having it all written out, and being transparent about it is paramount to delivering a level of compliance. And that's kind of the start of it. Is we get there, And we put our cards on the table. We have to be transparent. We have to, keep in mind the things we're doing, why we're doing them, what the outcomes and goals are, and we must be transparent because we can't let fear drive the conversation. At the end of the day, all fears aside, we do have that job to do, and it must be done because it is our data. We have to protect it. We've got that legal requirement. So that's an important first step.
I was going to say that transparency thing is an important conversation too. I mean, that way, I think you can create clarity for then your employees as to why these procedures exist, why these policies exist. Have conversation, even if it's not documented, which it should be, but in staff meetings and those kind of things about what expectations you have of them and what they can or can't use their personal device for when it comes to work, because these laws about you have an obligation and a requirement to protect the data that you use to transact your business, and we'll get into privacy next, but even contractual obligations, whether it's with carriers or all the third parties you work with, they all probably have something in there about the agency in this case, or the business in the middle of protecting shared data and an expectation about who has access to what and what they can do with it. And I didn't know better, or I didn't know that was an expectation from the employee. That probably falls back on the employer as an error that could, that come back to bite you. So it's really important to be really clear about what data and what access to data is needed to do the job, and then probably to make sure that the employee has the requisite tools or clarity about how to use the tools at their disposal to do the job. Because and that also probably matters in a sense of acting in good faith too, in the event that something unfortunate happens. And we think about data breaches as the most common thing, but where I thought you were going, Jason, was even if it's funky, it's still fine when you got a healthy employee-employer relationship. We're working together, we're grinding through the thing, and we might have good days and bad days. But if there's a separation, even if it's voluntary, how quickly you can terminate access and claw back things that might be corporate property from an employee's device, or what goes and you don't even know it, that's where it can get really funky. And things like your contact list, right? Do the people I know, is that somebody else's asset? Then text messages, those are the two that seem to come to my mind. So maybe as we navigate into privacy or kind of work our way through this content, I would love it if you could kind of riff on those couple of things as well, and how blurry contact names and text messages can be.
Yeah, and I think that's that I tend to think of along the lines of that conversation, not around compliance, but of privacy. Although compliance says, you must do X and you must do Y and you must do Z, but privacy is a little more nuanced, and that's the perfect example. You have a producer, he's got a book of business, he spent 5 or 6 years building a Rolodex. Well, whose Rolodex is it? Is this corporate data? Is this proprietary employee-owned data? Good to know that answer before you have to know that answer. But there are things like that, and this is where it gets challenging and where privacy comes in, because in order to accomplish the one, sometimes I have to overstep in the other. So in my auditing, in my monitoring, in my execution of my mandate to protect the data, there might be some personal stuff in there. So, my LastPass, for example, I might have a couple of passwords in there that are mine, not Kite, and if we ever parted ways, what becomes of those passwords? Kite has, I suppose, some degree an obligation to purge them. It's not their data, but they may not even know it's buried in the minutia. So therein lies the problem. and the balancing act that happens between the employee and the employer rights, obligations, and roles. And again, this is multi-layered stuff. It happens on the state level, it happens on the national level, the multinational level. And the curious thing here is it tends to happen backwards. So compliance usually happens where you are. If you're licensed by the state of New York compliancy laws apply. If you're operating in Virginia compliancy laws apply. If I'm operating in Maryland and I have an employee in California privacy rights now apply to me on behalf of that employee. So it works backwards, and that's where it gets really challenging really quickly. Because if I've got employees or clients or vendors or whatever in 50 states, I now have 50 privacy laws to look through and land on. So how I treat my California employee is going to be functionally different than how I treat my Washington State employee. And yet, from a culture perspective, from an ethics perspective, they're peers and equals. I have to honor them the same. I have to treat them the same. They deserve the same level of respect and all those things. But California says oftentimes that I can't do what I think is best for all of my people. I can't do it with this one person because it would violate a law. So you sprinkle some ethics on there, and it gets super, super weird.
Well, we could spend all day on privacy law. I think it's just important to know that there's this layering of things here. But yeah, that's why it's important, I think, to have these things laid out in terms of whose data is what, who's doing what, how we're going through them. This is the cultural dynamic, and it's probably a great pivot into ethics. But what are the expectations of after hours work? And then once the toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak, right? How does it go back in? And are you encouraging people to use their weekends and their after hours and their vacations for the battery recharge that they're intended? Or maybe that's role based, and maybe you get to a certain point, you're owning and you're running in an agency, but you have to have a conversation to say, hey, moving into this role means A, B, or C, right? Like I might need you on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning or at 11 o'clock at night, but that's not intuitive to employees necessarily. And then knowing you got the overachiever who's willing to work on a Saturday afternoon if the weather's horrible outside. Okay, but then does that become an expectation? And does that create, like you've mentioned with California a few times, now is that an unintended expense? And how do you manage that culturally and with some level of equity across your employee base is where kind of really the ethics and integrity thing comes. So sometimes something could be compliant and it could be legal, but it still might not be okay to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, even if you wanted it, even if the employee is asking for it, sometimes you do have to get creative in your solution to meet the culture, to honor the employee, and yet still not run afoul of the law.
Well, I've heard, stories of people, that might have hourly employees that are like, I'm willing to come in a half hour early every day just to get caught up for a few minutes. And it's like, well, okay, that's not okay. And you have to leave at a certain, I don't know, it's quirky. And this gets more into an overall employment practices kind of thing. But reason we're having this conversation is how exacerbated it gets when somebody actually has the tools in their living room, to do the work. And what does that mean to your organization when it relates to compliance and privacy? And do you owe them something that you might not be expecting, or are they doing something that wouldn't be good for your business and vice versa?
Yeah, I think the overarching moral of this story, when it comes to data privacy, when it comes to employee privacy, number one, transparency of intent wins the day. I mean, it's got to be an honest, level playing field. Otherwise, you're not getting this boulder uphill without a fight. And the other piece is it cannot be done in a vacuum. You can't take your leadership into a room and put together a plan and come out with a plan and say, okay, here's the plan. It doesn't allow for employee advocates. You're going to miss something. You're going to have your HR expertise in there. You're going to have people like ACT. You're going to have people like Kite coming in that are to some degree providing advice, but to other degree holding you accountable and making sure that you're truly asking yourselves the right questions. Do you want to be doing that? Think through the implications. We've seen it happen. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying if you go down that path, this is what the road looks like. Now decide if that's the road you want to travel. Now you know what it looks like. Could be a good ride. You just don't know. I take Jeeps off-road all the time, and I go through some crazy trails. Helps to know what I'm getting into so that I feel satisfied and, and more importantly, safe and intact coming out of it.
Well, I think that your point about transparent. Sorry, Jason, I interrupted.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the conversation, and maybe then we can kind of make the leap right into MDM versus MAM as a kind of the last nugget here to respect time. But you talked about pulling the leaders into a room and talking about things. I mean, this gets super culturally, but we've heard this so many times about the younger generations in the workforce and how much more open they are about employee related things that the generation I grew up in would never talk about. Anything that even is within 2 or 3 circles out on the bullseye from salary would be kind of taboo at the lunchroom. But hey, guess what? My boss is giving me $25 for this, or I got an app that allows me to do this for work, or this got taken away, whatever those kind of things are. I mean, I think the power of transparency and the transparency of intent to use or not only does it protect your data and your privacy and your ability to remain compliant and clean as all this stuff, but I think it can be a morale enhancer as well. Some people might feel like it's constrictive, but at least people will know the playing conditions. And these are the guardrails and these are the guidelines. And when you're bringing a new employee on and onboarding them, having this thought out is a great way of really minimizing the risk for surprises one way or the other. And I'm convinced that how somebody uses their own devices and what tools they're given when they get employed probably isn't an employee's questioning through the interview process, and it's probably not part of what's articulated. And you get the job and it's like, okay, well, here's the stuff. And then it's, we're, again, to your point, we're probably at a spot now where everybody has a cell phone, but I lived through a world where it was, you may or may not get a corporately provided device, and that can become expensive to people to manage. So it's just stuff to think about here. So I know we got the ethics slide up. It would be remiss to not spend a second here, but I want to make sure we do talk about those final couple points about MDM versus MAM as a mechanical conversation here before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think we did a very good job of weaving ethics into the thread as we've gone along. I think the only thing really left unsaid on the context of ethics is knowing the expectations that we are intentionally or unintentionally setting, especially as we get a lot right. As we get a lot right, we're going to get some weirdness. So, as an example, I've got some folks that they like to work when the kids are done and in bed. So they do their best working at 10:30, 11 p.m. Eastern. So you might see them fire off some Teams messages and fire off some chat messages or some emails. And had another employee come in and said, yeah, this really stresses me out because I feel an obligation to respond to this email as it came in. I'm like, no. Don't Don't do that. Don't feel that. If Bob chooses to work at 10:30 at night, that does not mean you need to feel any pressure whatsoever to respond. You know, you respond when you can, when it works for you, in the same way that he's writing this. And it made us realize that, like, wow, we need to over communicate this, because we know we're all working differently and in different ways, and in the ways that are making us most effective. But the tone, the examples, the expectations that we're not setting might be inferred. So, maybe we start those phrases with, hey, nobody, don't look at this now. I'm just getting it out of my head. Type the stuff, hit enter. Things like that, especially from leadership, go an awful long way of paving the road of what all this BYOD stuff and how we all work together and be respectful of each other and our responsibilities. It just makes everything kind of work and be smooth.
Hey guys, I just wanted to bring your attention to all the great questions we have there about all the things that you guys have talked about so far.
All right, we can do that. I'm always more interested talking about the higher level stuff, because when you get down to the nuts and the bolts, it's super simple. When you have everything else figured out, the nuts and the bolts are so easy.
All right. So if you jump down, Jason, to the bottom of the questions, those are coming up first. And we have a really great one from Jerry.
Jerry says, an employee uses their own personal device and has work email and Teams on their phone. If our agency uses Microsoft 365 and the employee leaves and I turn off the email or change the password, shouldn't it stop the emails from coming through the phone? It should, and it does, but not in the way that you think. Access has kind of become tokenized. So it's not password authentication every single time. So if you disable an account, emails may still show up on that phone. I was out of the country recently with policies applied to the system that did not allow me to check my email. I could see it come in from time to time, but I couldn't interact with it. That is an important thing when you think about BYOD, when you think about, am I owning the devices ironclad, or am I allowing employees to access? I think ultimately something like that may depend on the type of data. I mean, if this is make or break or stuff for your organization, you want to mandate device ownership. That way, you can't stop the emails because of that tokenized access. But boy, can you turn that device into a solid gold brick and make it non-functional. And that's the route you'd want to take. You can't do that if you don't own the device. But if you do, that's the right answer. Some things are just that important. So you do need to think about, what kind of emails are we talking about when that happens? Because the access will be shut down. It is a slow trickle, and that falls into mobile application management. You've got some rules within your iPhone app that are different than rules in your Outlook app. And so if you're using Microsoft 365, I say standardize on the Outlook app as the only means of accessing email remotely. Whether you own the device or the employee owns the device, do that so that you can put in some application management policies that'll get you a little bit more granular control about what those emails do within the Outlook sphere. That way, there's less device footprint in there, and there's more application control that's going to put you in a better spot.
So let's just jump into the next question from Colleen. It says, how does AI and specifically the Apple announcement impact phones, whether they are owned by the company or personally?
So, well, how does AI impact anything is the question first and foremost. There's a lot we know, but there's an awful lot we don't know. And in this, you know, based on the announcement, we don't know what we don't know. But here's what we do know. So iPhone is partnering with ChatGPT AI engine. Samsung Galaxy phones have their own AI engine. Google Pixels, Android has its own AI engine, Gemini. So this is already commonplace across the board all over the place. And so that's ultimately going to be a function, again, of the application. Is the application going to allow the AI to pierce the veil and peer into the data it holds? Facebook, as an app on your phone, probably going to say yes, because the AI engine on the phone, Facebook is going to want to be a part of that to expose the things. The iPhone Mail app, absolutely, it's going to want to be a part of that AI experience. The Outlook app, probably going to want to put some granular controls on it to help keep the AI out. On this side, you've got your own AI. You've got Copilot, and it's trained on your business stuff. And so again, we go back to understanding the applications and the accesses. Same situation. I say get on that Outlook app as your means of providing that email. It puts you in a better place to separate and make distinctions between what is the corporate space, what is the personal space, what the AI can do. Because that way the AI can run wild and do all the personal things and do them well. And I still have this protected ecosystem that I might want to consider opening it up if the data allows for it, if the privacy allows for it, if the compliance allows for it. But I can make that as an informed decision and a granular control that I can document and explain why I did what I did and what the value was and why it was important.
But we have another question from Colleen. I recently heard that another agency does not allow Android devices to be used even in a managed device environment. Why the difference with Android devices?
Well, I mean, there's no reason you can't allow for all devices, but ultimately, it's what you can control. It's what you can manage, what you have visibility on, and what you can support. So if you were to choose to say iPhones only or Androids only or something like that, to some degree, it's a technical decision. Because the nature of an Android phone, it has an Android operating system, there are technical differences, or there are even some technical limitations in terms of what I can control on the device and what I can't. And it's different than iPhones, which run a fundamentally different operating system. So they're all phones, but they're completely different. So, Windows 10, Windows 11 computers, they live in a system. Androids live in a system. iPhones live in a system. MacBooks live in a system because Mac OS is different than iOS. And each one has some pros and some cons and some things you can do and things that you can't. So if an agency says we're not doing Android, we're doing iPhones only, it could be from supportability. We want everybody to have the same features. We want everybody to have the same access. And we want to be able to help answer your questions without having to be experts on all of these platforms. That may be why they chose to do it the way they did. But it could also be controls. They may have a software or tool set that allows them to facilitate things on Android devices or iPhones and control iPhones that they don't have for their Android counterparts. So there are reasons why you may go left or may go right, but there's no reason that you have to. You can certainly choose, and we certainly do, choose to support and allow in a safe and secure manner a choice in the matter.
Okay, awesome. All right, we have a question from Lance. From the perspective of an MSP, is the answer more and or deeper RMM tools? So remote monitoring, right?
Well, that's a loaded question. Full disclosure, I don't know how to separate my personal and business opinions from these things. But I do know that MSPs, managed service providers, and RMM, remote management tools. This is what we use to control things and to provide visibility and things like that. And so for some MSPs, this is a must. We have to have more tools to deliver more services so that we have more visibility. For other MSPs, it might be the opposite. You know, Kite has kind of taken a unique approach where we see Microsoft 365 as the primary answer. So you move into that ecosystem, which is your ecosystem, and I'm a partner, I'm an access, but if we part ways, I do not rip my tools out of your environment and your organization. You don't start over. It's yours. You take it, you travel, you find the partner that works best for you. When we do something like that, we've really set you up for success. Not that we want to lose customers, not that we do. I mean, we have a really healthy and growing fan base. But I like that approach because it's more honest, it's more authentic. It's yours, it's your agency, it's your ecosystem, it's your 365 environment. You and I are partnered together to manage it. So no, I don't. For me, the answer is not bigger RMMs and more powerful tools and things like that. For me, the answer is better process, better visibility into the tools that already exist. It's the harder path. It requires the MSP to grow skills we've never even thought of having before. But to me, that's my. I won't even say right answer because that would be unfair. But that's our answer. But absent the ability to drive that skill set and things like that, I do think off-the-shelf tools are what's required to meet you where you are. To deliver those things, I have a Microsoft MVP on staff. That's not something everybody can say. If you don't have one, you're gonna have to buy a tool. It just gets philosophical beyond that. So I'll stop it there.
All right. We have a great question from Kim. She says, if I log into my personal email on my workstation, will they still have a right to my data, even if I've not downloaded anything to the local device?
Even if you've not downloaded anything local. So
I'm thinking like you have a Gmail or a Yahoo.
Yeah. So you've fired up Edge or you've fired up Chrome and you've gone to gmail.com as an example and you've logged in and there is data. There's absolutely data. That screen did not show you things without producing a footprint. And it may be a sliver, it may be a cookie, it may not be anything consequential. But there's a web cache, there are temporary files, there's data. Do they have a right to it? Well, number one, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not your lawyer. But here's what I know is you logged into Gmail and you put data on my device, a device that I have a legal obligation to care for and support, and I have to know what's on it. And the only way I'm going to know what's on it is if I look. And if I look, then I'm going to find out it's your data. But by then I've already looked at it. So whatever it is, I've seen it, and now we got to work backwards from that.
And aren't there some examples, Jason, of maybe some of the more prominent breaches are by way of people using a work device to kind of log in outside of a work platform? And so somebody could click on a phishing email in their Gmail or Yahoo from their work, or they're logging into a bank or any of their personal accounts that may not be putting the same level of diligence into, into protecting access. And it's, when you're operating on the work computer, that's the computer that the bad stuff happens to, and then the network that it goes to. And so again, I echo with caps and exclamations what Jason says. We're not attorneys, and we're definitely not anybody else's. But I don't think it's unfathomable to say that many corporate usage devices would include something along the lines of anything you do on a work provided tool is subject to our monitoring, and up to and including termination if it violates any of the employee handbook, or ethical or cultural, or even just access or data thing. So it's scary. I mean, I have friends who say their work computer pops up even in the morning. Their laptop will remind them that anything they do on this device while logged in is subject to monitoring, and to expect no privacy.
Yeah. So there's a tool out there. There are lots of tools out there, but I'll use this one as an example. It's an employee productivity tool called ActiveTrack. And one of the features it takes periodic screenshots throughout the day. When the machine's waking up, when it's changing tasks and stuff, and ultimately what it tries to do is create a record of what the employee did for the day without the minutia, without the stuff. Was the employee on task or off task throughout the day? That's what we're trying to accomplish. And part of what it does is take screenshots. So if you're running that tool and you happen to check your Gmail on the precise moment and point in time that screenshot happens, if you happen to be reading your divorce papers, for example, I've got a perfect screenshot of your divorce papers that I have. Wasn't my goal. That's not what I was after. I didn't put it there. And yet now it's part of my data and historical record. And that's where you get into the things about data privacy laws and, rights to be forgotten and rights to be purged and stuff like that, where you can come to me and say, hey, you took a screenshot of that. You should not have. I don't want it. I need you to remove it. I might be able to pull it from the tool, from the record. The tool may not allow for it. There may not be a mechanism that allows me to scrub it. It may be that locked down. It's going to vary by tool. It's going to vary by situation. But there's a whole conversation of what happens long before we even get to rights and compliance and things. If you check your Gmail on that device, things are going to happen. And long before we even think about it, well, they already happened. I already saw the thing. That's how I knew, that's not supposed to be there. The law may say my eyes and my brain must forget, but can they enforce that? No, they can't. So that's where that whole transparency and stuff comes in, because there's going to be stuff on both sides of the fence. The employer may accidentally cross the line. The employee may accidentally cross the line. But it's, we have to be transparent. We have to be honest and ethical. It was not my goal to see what you were doing in Facebook or Gmail, and I need you to trust that, and I need you to understand that, and you and I need to work effectively together to make sure that I'm honoring your privacy and you feel good about that, because it is an encroachment, albeit unintentional, and perfectly legal and ethical for me to have seen what you chose to put up on the screen. We still have to navigate the human element of making that a non-issue.
Yeah. I know we've gone way over here, and I may be part of the problem trying to get back in. I can't see chats and Q&A, but I know we're 15 minutes past, so
Yeah, I think the last question is sort of, there's like 3 questions that are related to the Microsoft Authenticator app. So I think we wrap up with those.
Okay.
And if anything else comes in, we can always email the folks and give them an answer directly.
Yeah.
So the question is, we have one question that says, can you just explain what Microsoft Authenticator is? This is from Joe. Can you explain it more? And what exactly does it accomplish? And what are the key risks? And then we have a related question. So after the what is Microsoft Authenticator? One question is, if you have this on your phone, is there a chance that your employer could request your phone for searching for security risks? Is the one follow-up question. And the other is, do you believe a stipend is needed if you're using your phone, your personal device for Microsoft Authenticator, which is, you have that for work. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you, Jason. Go for it.
Okay, so in terms of a stipend, I'll give you $1. It is a very small and very lightweight app on a super powerful device. There's no monetary amount that's going to make it make sense from a perspective of indemnification. Like there just aren't enough dollars to have in the conversation. The real conversation we're having is a little bit different. Is I've asked you to do some personal things. So here we are. We're engaged now because I've asked you to do some personal things. So what is the Microsoft Authenticator app? It is the Authenticator app put out by Microsoft. So take the Microsoft off the table. What is an Authenticator app? These are multi-factor authentication applications. When you put in your username and your password and it asks you for that extra piece of information, that 6-digit code or something like that, that is the Authenticator app. Cisco Duo is one a lot of folks are familiar with. Google's got an Authenticator app. Microsoft's got one. Chances are at this point, you're probably using some form of an Authenticator app in your personal life because your Facebook needs MFA, just like your bank needs MFA, just like your corporate Outlook needs MFA. And we've learned sometimes the hard way that text messaging is not the safest way.
That's part of that, right, Jason, is that some of the presumption now in a safety mode is that if a bad actor has enough of your information to try to hack you, they can get to your email to steal the code and probably your text. So go to one of these apps as a way of just continually narrowing the pathway between you and your multi-factor authentication process.
Yep. And we kind of started life with the secondary email. Is you want to log into this thing, I'm going to send the authentication code to a secondary or a personal email, and you're going to dig it out of that. Well, that's easy. I just compromised the personal email, and now I've got the MFA. So then we moved on to the text messaging. That's easy. Now I just do a SIM swap and compromise that piece of cake. Any time a new and exciting hacker process comes out, it's just a matter of minutes before somebody productizes it and makes it so easy that you don't even need the For Dummies book to make it effective. So we move on to the next thing, and right now the Authenticator app is the most secure method of filtering and securing those multi-factor authentications. So the Microsoft Authenticator app is interesting to me. Number one, Microsoft, if you're using Microsoft 365, and their own Microsoft Authenticator app for sure, tools that they control. Curious to me that the Microsoft Authenticator app does allow itself to back up to a personal Microsoft email account. So you can go sideways on that real quick. So that's something to be aware of. But so I guess the big question on the table is, does my employer have a right to that? Again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, but I would say yes. As an employer, I would feel comfortable asking. And I might do it with HR advice. I might do it with legal advice and counsel on hand. But as the employer, I would feel right in asking. I need to see inside of the Microsoft Authenticator app that you use for work, so that I can validate some things, so that I can verify some things, so that I can understand some things. That doesn't mean you have a legal obligation to go, here you go, you can take my device, here's my unlock code, give it back to me when you're done. That's not the way that exchange should happen. And I don't think anybody would ask that. But the way I would navigate that exchange as an employer is I would say, hey, can we sit down? Can you unlock it for me? Can you just scroll me through? I won't even touch the device. You can keep the screen away from me, and then, just show me what I need to see. And that's it. I can respect your privacy. I can keep all that in the box and still see what I need to see. And depending on the situation at hand, you might want to have your own legal counsel present. And ultimately, it all depends on why I'm looking for what I'm looking for. But sometimes those are things. I mean, if you're working with unions and union shops, yeah, have your union rep present. It's okay. But yeah, there's certainly a request to be made there, and unless I did something wrong and my lawyer is saying shut up and fight, I don't see harm in engaging in the conversation. But again, now we get into the legal minutia.
Yeah, which is all around this topic, right?
It's a dense topic.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely appreciate everybody that's hung on this thing and
Yeah.
right. I mean, this is a heady conversation, and there's real questions about, what are my rights here, which, again, neither one of us are attorneys, but the conversation in of itself, I think, just exposes the fact that just downloading a couple of apps and logging in might be great 99.9% of the time, but nothing's perfect 100% of the time. And I grew up in a world where we said, hey, when these kind of things started a divorce, and understand what it might look like if you worked backwards. I think it's important to understand what this looks like. To reuse a bad analogy, once the toothpaste's out of the tube, it doesn't go back very easy. So having these conversations as an employer with your leadership team and your counsel to define how you want to handle this, and then transparent what's and whys is really important for employees, because nobody wants to be skeptical of their employer, and no employer wants to be skeptical of their employees, and there's a lot of room for that in this general dialogue if we're not having good conversation. So
and yet we must, if we're
right,
if we're treating this personal data properly, I have to be skeptical, even if you've never given me a reason. Otherwise I'm not doing my job. Like my seatbelt, I've never had a reason to wear my seatbelt, but I do it, right? Because I should.
Well, it's why so many people, like, for example, this is really kind of simple, but set up their LinkedIn, for example, with their personal email address. And so if you're ever, and so it unless you own the business, it's fascinating to me when I get a LinkedIn firm request that they work for a larger organization, and it's through that. I mean, odds are they're going to stay there for quite a while, but well, if you separated your employment even voluntarily, odds are you're not thinking about reconfiguring your LinkedIn account, and now you could be locked out. So it's simple like that to more sophisticated things. But let's do this. I feel like we've certainly exhausted our welcome in all of your lives for today. But
it's a great topic to kind of camp on and think through in great detail.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's do this. Let's wrap. Huge thanks to Jason and the whole team at Kite Tech for collaborating on this, and their support of ACT and what ACT exists to do to help independent agencies understand these things and to have these conversations. So we're super proud of the relationship and excited about what we've been able to do today. And many thanks to everybody who joined, whether you're still on live or stuck around through the recording. We really appreciate it. And please go check out the contact information for Jason and the team at Kite if you want to learn more about what they're doing to help our industry. And please feel free to reach out to myself or Jenny Winkworth on the ACT team if you want to learn more about the tools and resources we have, or just want to get involved in helping shape the conversations we're having with our industry. Really appreciate it. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, guys.